Momentum is, as we have described, a seedbed for ideas. And we try to find people from all sorts of unusual places who approach issues in a new and unique way. Ethan certainly is an example of that, Professor Lessig as well. Our next speaker, and the last for this session, is an unusual person in the sense that she is a capitalist. She is a very successful business person who has embraced from day one a set of progressive values which she holds deeply. And I hope you will join me in welcoming Melissa Bradley-Burns to the stage.
There's some slides that are coming. Or not. Oh, there we go. Okay. First, let me say thank you very much. It is truly a pleasure to be here. As Drummond alluded to, this was an opportunity for many of us who did have the time and privilege to speak at Momentum to kind of come back and give an update to our presentation, so version 2.0. And so while I am privileged for that opportunity, I must say that now we are celebrating so many milestones this year. I sure hope this is the last time I have to give this speech, because I am truly optimistic and hopeful that now that we are somewhat in charge, that we are truly moving from rhetoric to reality, and that these speeches will no longer be needed because we will have actualized all the things that we are hoping for. So let me just say that I think it's safe to say that we all know our country is facing an economic crisis, and many Americans are experiencing unprecedented instability. Individual Americans of all races are facing dire situations. They're losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, many of them are even losing their families. The current economic crisis is leading more and more people away from the American dream, and many more towards an American nightmare. Today, a perfect storm of structural racism, poor lack of comprehensive economic policy, and deregulation is all around us. Pathways out of poverty is more than rhetoric, as we watch the millions of middle class sink to lower class, and everyone is struggling to make ends meet. Many have called this an equal opportunity recession. Young people, old people, rural people, urban people, all being laid off and all suffering. However, the reality is that those most impacted still continue to be communities of color, African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos. Statistics for Americans are deeply troubling. 12.5 million Americans are unemployed, and you've heard these. There's nothing new about these. They just get worse and worse every single day. Analysts project that with our current unemployment rate at 8%, it could be around 9.4%. Remember that number, 9.4% for the United States by the end of the year. In March of this year, over 300,000 homes were in foreclosure. That's almost a 50% increase since last year. And in terms of what Americans are making, $25 billion less than last year. And we've heard this, the CEO who was making $1 million, who's now delivering pizza for just over $10 an hour. We're also seeing people who do, fortunately, still have their homes owing more than what they're worth. I don't know if people are from the Beltway, but I live in Cabin John, Maryland. People bought homes 2-3 years ago worth $2 million. They owe about $1 million, $1.5 million. They're worth less than $1 million right now. The statistics get even more staggering for people of color. 24% of blacks and 21% Latinos are living in poverty, compared to 8% of whites. Remember what I said, by the end of the year, the unemployment rate is about 9.4%? Black unemployment is expected to be over 11% by the end of this year, and up to 20% by 2010. And if you talk about many of the folks that Ethan were talking about who are incarcerated ages 16 to 19, their rate is 32.8%. We have not seen that since the Great Depression. The most staggering statistic for me was that in nearly half of low-income households right now, after housing costs are paid, and for many folks that's just rent, they have $257 per month for food. Many of us probably spend more than that on lunch. They have $29 for clothing, and most importantly, but most scary, as someone who's an asthmatic, they have $9 for medical care. And we obviously know that nearly 30% of blacks have zero negative net worth, and the statistics go on. And while all Americans worry about economic insecurity during this crisis, its most damaging impacts are unevenly distributed. People of color are unemployed more, they're hungry more, they're homeless more. Many have already fallen through the widening cracks that we have seen for years. Indeed, people of color are facing barriers and not opportunities at every single turn. When economists talk about it's going to get better, there is no sense of optimism that communities of color will thrive during this time. So as we think about what we can do as a progressive community, it's important to remember that this is not about all yachts being lifted. It's about all boats being lifted. Economic equality is deeply rooted in the growth of our economy. However, we know that we cannot move forward as a divided country. President Obama, during his inaugural address, said a nation cannot prosper long when it favors only the prosperous. The success of our economy has always depended not just on the size of our gross domestic product, but also on the reach of our prosperity and our ability to extend opportunity. This is our time to truly extend opportunity to all. The nation's current economic downturn is threatening this deep racial divide that has existed for many years. There is a recession for many of us in this country, but statistics show there's actually a depression also happening, and it's happening in the Black community. And it's been growing for the past 5 years with the high rates of recession and statistics plummeting in all of our communities. It's clear that the United States needs all of its resources to be competitive in our global economy, and now is the time for us to start. The design and implementations of many of the policies that we've heard so far here, and I'm sure you will continue to hear, the importance is that they are tailored, that we have got to let go of the one-size-fits-all. We are not all the same. We have the opportunity to create a common vision, but we can do it respectfully and still recognize our differences, our historical challenges, and the barriers that we have experienced. As we celebrate Martin Luther King's 80th birthday this year, our first Black president this year, all those things are good, but it's still time for a change. Because statistics still show that the top 10% of Americans have 68% of the wealth in this country. It is time for our policies to change and for us truly to create pathways out of poverty and stop just talking about it. So what can we do? The distribution of the recession's worst results are uneven, as I've said several times. This is a time for us to rebuild, for us to start with a blank sheet, to develop policies that are fair, that look at distribution, equitable distribution. It is time for us to keep repeating that which we know already does not work. For example, we've seen the cumulative effects of historic and current housing discrimination. We've got redlining, we've got racial covenants. These have all left people of color with less equity and access to credit, making them vulnerable to predatory lending, unscrupulous practices, and the like. In terms of home ownership, we need better regulation of the real estate and mortgage lending industries. It is time that we take on those that have taken over communities of color. There needs to be a stronger national standard for home buying instead of the current complicated system of state, local, federal regulations. A national standard would simplify the home buying process. And in fact, there's been an act, the Home Ownership Equity Protection Act, that has existed for a long time, but it's gotten nowhere for the main reason that Dr. Lessig talked about. The mortgage lending industry has successfully stopped through their power and, more importantly, through their pocketbook, this being an effective bill. As the nation faces a recession sparked by the mass securitization of bad loans, it is apparent that greater regulation is required, and this is an opportunity for us. In terms of job creation, we have a real opportunity here. We already know that many people are being laid off from work. When I first walked in here this morning, I was like, wait, this is going to be a really good meeting, or this is like the last GM stockholder meeting for all of us as we now own that company. But again, statistics show that people of color continue to be underworked, if not at work at all. And when you look at Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American communities, they're facing barriers, many of which that Ethan talked about. Unfair criminal background checks, charges that the average person who has a similar situation is not reporting on their record. In many cases, it's the infrastructure. They can't even get to the jobs and where they're located because so many people are leaving the urban areas. As a result, communities of color relative to others are facing higher rates of poverty.